What if this person, this Protestant living in this society, never has any, never, no doubt ever arises in his mind that he's living in a false church, or he's believing a false religion? What if no doubt ever arises in his mind? So this is a question. He says, but what if the doubt never rises in his mind about the matter? And he goes on bona fide in a way he was brought up. In other words, he continues to sincerely live out his faith, his Protestant faith. No doubt ever arises to even think that maybe there's something wrong with this Protestant religion. What about that person? Can he be saved? Now, once a doubt arises, if a person is living in that false religion and they begin to and they doubt aspects of that religion, at that point, that ignorance is no longer invincible, because now they're at a point where they can make a choice. They have to follow that doubt, the reason that they see the inconsistency with their faith, the falseness of it. So at that point, their ignorance is no longer invincible, because now they see an error and they need to follow it. Are they going to follow it, or are they going to reject it and live in ignorance, go back into ignorance and not really seek it? Or are they going to just kind of brush it off or whatnot? So once they express some kind of doubt or some kind of question to the reality of that false religion they're in, that's when the ignorance becomes no longer invincible. They're at that crossroad right there. Okay? It says it's enough for ignorance to be blamable if there's sufficient reason to doubt it, but yet they choose not to. Okay? So if they have sufficient reason to doubt the false religion they're in, and they continue on in their ignorance, then that ignorance is blamable. Okay? Here's what he says. He says, it is enough to make his ignorance blamable that there be sufficient reasons for doubting, though from his unjust prejudices, from folly, precipitation, and rashness, from obscenity and pride, or other such depravations of the heart, he hinders these reasons from exciting a formal doubt in the mind. In other words, if there's sufficient reason to doubt, but because of a sinful disposition in the soul, in the heart, he clouds out those reasons, because his mind and his reason are darkened from his own sinful passions and lusts. He begins to cloud out sufficient reasons, and be blinded by those reasons, those sufficient reasons to doubt his false religion. Then it becomes blamable. Okay? Then it becomes blamable. And doubt should arise in the mind of somebody who's living in this false faith. So he begins to question the idea of, well, if somebody's living in this false religion, they never doubt. That seems to indicate there's something spiritually wrong with such an individual who's living in this false religion and never ever doubts there's some error with this false religion. It speaks more of the disposition of that person's soul. He says, nay, they're not having such a doubt when they have just and solid grounds for doubting, rather make them in some degree more guilty, because it shows the greater corruption of heart and their depraved disposition. This is Bishop continues, says, now a person brought up in a false faith, like the Protestant faith, the Protestant sects, which the scripture calls sects of perdition, doctrines of devils, perverse things, lies, hypocrisy, so on, and who has heard of the true church, of Christ, which condemns all these sects and sees the divisions and dissensions which they constantly have among themselves. Like all the different Protestant groups, Protestant sects at war with each other, at doctrinal war with each other. They can't agree on anything. There's so much division among them. All the different issues you can just see before your eyes, right? It says, have always before his eyes the most cognate reasons to doubt of the way he is in, all right? Right? He has all these reasons to doubt. He says, then if any due attention or examination be made with sincere disposition of his heart, it must convince him that he is in the wrong. And the more he examines, the more he will see it. For this plain reason, that it is simply impossible that false doctrine, lies, and hypocrisy should ever be supported by any solid grounds, sufficient to satisfy any reasonable person. So this is what is interesting. Well, Bishop Hayes says that a person who's open with the proper, with cooperation with God's grace, with a proper disposition, someone who's truly invincibly ignorant, who cannot be fooled, who cannot be fooled by such false arguments as the false religions have. Their arguments, he should be able to see, after especially examining the true faith and seeing the falseness of their faith in their arguments, can never be convinced by such things. Someone who's truly seeking God, right? Can never be, I said, there's no reasonable person will believe these false religions because their arguments aren't reasonable. That's basically what he says. No reasonable person is going to believe in unreasonable arguments if they have a proper disposition, cooperating with God's grace, truly invincibly ignorant. They will eventually be moved to the way of the truth. Basically what Bishop Hayes is saying. So he says, hence, if such a person never doubts, but goes on as supposed bona fide in his own way, notwithstanding the strong grounds of doubt which he has daily before his eyes, this evidently shows either a most supine negligence in the concerns of his soul, or that his heart is totally blinded by passion and prejudice. Right? He says there are many such people like that. So that's how Bishop Hay answers this particular question about what about the Protestants who live among the Catholics? Okay. Can they be invincibly ignorant and be saved? He says, well, basically that it's impossible for such a person to be invincibly ignorant. And that if they never doubt their faith, even though they're living among the true faith and they can hear about the true faith and they can see it, and they can, no doubt ever arises in their mind, then there's something wrong with the disposition of that person's soul. And if there's something wrong with the disposition of that person's soul, that means that basically that invincible ignorance is not invincible anymore. It's culpable ignorance, because if they are cooperating with God's grace, even though still yet invincibly ignorant, then they'll be moved more and more to see the truth. Eventually, the truth will be revealed to him. That's what Bishop Hayes is going to argue. Continue, all right. But if they see if they can't see the falseness of their faith, if no doubt ever arises, then it's most likely, it has to be, that there is a disposition of the soul that they are holding on to, that they're working with, and that is blinding them to that fact. And therefore, it's a culpable ignorance. All right? It's a culpable ignorance because, so it's just what it is. Now here Bishop Hay, in order to support this, quotes St. Paul here, where he says, "And if our gospel be also hid, it is hid to them that are lost, in whom the God of this world has blinded the minds of unbelievers, that the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should not shine upon them." He says, "Behold, the real cause of their incredulity. they are so much enslaved by the things of this world, by the depravity of their own heart, that the devil, by his means, blinds them, that they should not see the light, but an ignorance which arises from such depraved dispositions is a guilty ignorance, a voluntary ignorance, and therefore can never excuse them. Ave Maria.